When the Rao moved in 1591, right after, the same year, but right after that Ragamala was painted, he moved back to Bundi, and he obviously took those painters with him. These painters had invented these compositions that we see in these Ragamala paintings that are right here. It's a very elaborate series, but there was nothing like them before. They came up with those for the first time. They were obviously very inventive painters who were trying to do something quite new and different. So they invented the whole series of compositions for Ragamala paintings, but that series of compositions is only used in lands that were under the power or related to the power of the state of Bundi. So when they paint a painting such as this, one of the best paintings from that series, the painters themselves made a record, kept a record of the composition itself. Then when they got to Bundi, it was copied onto the walls of the palace at Bundi. This is one of the ways, there are a couple of ways, in which we can see that what happened at Chunar actually led to the kinds of paintings that we see in this palace at Bundi itself. Now, this is the ceiling. I mentioned that the upper layers, there's the hunting frieze that goes along. Below that is the Ragamala series. Above it is a series of pictures that are primarily of the gods, and then there's a ceiling, a dazzling ceiling, which shows Krishna and what's called the Rasmandala, the circular dance, in which he's dancing with his devotees, the gopis, the ladies, the cowgirls of the villages, who come out in the moonlight to dance with Krishna and then get into such an ecstatic state. They dance in a circle round and round and round, and each of them, Krishna multiplies himself, or they feel that Krishna multiplies himself, so each one of them is dancing with Krishna alone. It's a kind of metaphor, it is a metaphor for the losing of a sense of individuality into a sense of the divine. And that, together with various mythological creatures, decorates this extremely beautiful and very elaborate ceiling in the palace at Bundi. Now, the hunting frieze. The hunting frieze draws, fine, the Ragamala scene draws from the Ragamala that was done at Chunar by painters who'd been trained at the Mughal court, although they'd never done anything like a Ragamala at the Mughal court. There is no Ragamala. There was no Ragamala done for the Mughal emperors. The scenes that are in this frieze that goes around here, all the way around the room, are very, very different. They're hunting scenes, and they're scenes that are drawn from, in many ways, the kinds of scenes that we see in Mughal imperial hunting scenes. This is a scene of Akbar hunting tiger. Here is a scene of an uncertain ruler or prince who's hunting tiger, the tiger being twisted around the trunk of the elephant as the tiger is being twisted around this person here, a man running in with a bow and arrow here, a hunter running in with a bow and arrow here. The kind of dynamism, the kind of wildness, the kind of sense of life of a hunting scene is something which comes to these, again, directly from Mughal example. But above this, and above the area where the ruler himself would sit, there is a scene of architecture of a ruler sitting in a bastion up above in a kind of viewing tower, looking down as his elephants were being brought by him for inspection. And the ladies of the harem are along here, and this is what I told you existed at the time of the early 17th century, the only thing that existed on that hillside. None of that great, huge structure was there. This was the palace of Rao Bhoj, a single palace, freestanding palace then. It's now absolutely anchored in masonry. This was the pigeon tower that I pointed out earlier. This was the area for the harem. And this is the outer wall. And if you stand out looking at the wall today, there have been some changes to it. It's been virtually 4 centuries. But you can tell that this is exactly what they're seeing. They tried to give a very, very specific view of what the architecture itself was like. We keep referring back to this Ragamala. I want to refer once again to the drawing that was made on this Ragamala, because I think this drawing was made by the same artist that made the Ragamala painting itself. They simply are too distinctive and too close together. This is the kind of drawing that was used the kind of drawing that was used when a further Ragamala was made down the pike, that an artist would have kept these drawings along with his brushes and his colors and his papers in his bag of tools so that he could draw on them when somebody came along and said they wanted a Ragamala series. If we look carefully at that drawing and we look at the scene of the ladies from this area that's right here, directly, the first part that was painted in this room, directly above where the ruler sits. These are exactly the same figures, drawn with exactly the same kind of formula. And as you go through the exhibition upstairs, you'll see over and over again, especially in the non-court paintings, non-imperial Mughal paintings, that we tend to deal with types, figural types rather than individuals. The Mughals loved very, very specific portraits. Sometimes it's the most acute portrait, specific portrait that we can imagine, but that was not true in the Hindu and the Rajput traditions that we see in the areas outside the Mughal imperial court itself. And these figures are so distinctive within the range of figural types that are used that they simply have to have been done by the same artist, which means that this must have been done very, very soon after the 1591 Ragamala was painted at Chunar. In 1591, we know the Ragamala was painted, we have that inscription. An historian oddly enough, in Benares, named Lakshmi Dutt Vyas, has recently come up with a hitherto unknown Bundi history written by a court poet historian of the time that says that the son of the Raja then, the son being named Ratan Singh, in 1591, the Mughals came to him and said he had to give up the fort at Chunar. He refused. He killed a man. Needless to say, he eventually did leave and he went back to Bundi. All of these things happening in 1591. So the Ragamala was painted there, and Bundi gave up that fortress, went back to Bundi state itself in 1591, must have taken the same painters with them, and we see painters moving yet again, not sitting quietly, not sort of going every day to the same place of work, but constantly moving under different circumstances because of different historical events or different patronage demands. Now, as this was being painted at the very beginning, there's a lot of experimentation that's going on. We have a lot of paintings on paper, simply drawings of elephants. Another elephant standing in front of a tower as a group of elephants being inspected by a Raja who is torn in half there. The same kind of study and experimentation on paper of elephant pictures. And even when we move down the wall just to the left of the painting that I just showed you, the wall painting that I just showed you, there is a picture of a frontal elephant, an elephant being looked at, coming from the front, surrounded by other elephants. He's about to come and walk past the Raja in the tower as part of his inspection ceremony. And we have now on paper another painting of an elephant that's doing exactly the same thing. They were trying to work out, they were trying to show how these, an elephant is complex after all to depict. To show them twisting and turning in space, figures twisting and turning in space. They're much more interested, it seems to me, in elephants. This tradition, the tradition at Bundi and Kota, is much more interested in depicting elephants than it is in depicting people. These are very basic people when compared with the portraits that we just saw in, for example, the Padshah-nama. They have these kind of inflated torsos here, shoulders which are just a line that goes from the arm itself down the back of the figure. It's almost a kind of cartoon-like caricature depiction that we see. But these go on and on. There are lots of studies of elephants. The person who came up, two people that came up with these studies and really first began to put them together and the importance of them together. One was Kumar Sangram Singh of Navalgarh in India, in Jaipur, and the other was Stuart Cary Welch, the former head of the Islamic department here who really were the first to isolate these out and to really understand what the importance of these were. And slowly over time, you get individual elephants that are then brought together in these wonderful kind of clashes of figures, such as you see in this drawing, which is up in the exhibition upstairs, which actually I think is a drawing that must have been done very, very soon after these artists. It's, again, the same kinds of figures that we get in that wall painting of the inspection of the elephants. If you look at them in detail, the way the figures are drawn and the faces and the mustaches and all of that is drawn, that simply must have been done in the very early part of the 17th century. It's one of the earliest complex elephant studies, these two elephants clashing into each other, that we see anywhere within these traditions. And it continues further. The one on the upper part that we were just looking at in slightly larger size, which relates very closely to what was on the walls of the palace at Bundi, clearly was done at Bundi, because it relates to nothing but those things that are on the Bundi walls. But then we have another one, which is the same theme, clashing of elephants, nothing much in the background, very basic drawing of figures, figures that have these just a kind of swing to the back, nothing that shows you anatomy or a sense of weight and mass, the kind of thing that went into Mughal portraits, clearly in the same tradition. So it's a tradition that came out of what was going on at Bundi, which came out of what was going on at Chunar, which came from painters that had been trained at the Mughal court. But this because we can really relate the figure here, to my eye at least, to this man here. This man we know doesn't come from Bundi, he comes from Kota. This man on the elephant down here, wearing a turban, slightly earlier form of the turban that this man adopted once he became the Raja, is a man known as Jagat Singh, a prince. You know he's a prince because he's wearing a necklace of pearls, which is only worn by members of the ruling family. Now, do you remember Madho Singh? Madho Singh, who maybe I have that coming at this point. Madho Singh, who we saw at the very beginning. I said to you that this man here came from Bundi. He was adopted into the Mughal system. His father had capitulated, given up his lands to the Mughal emperor, became part of the Mughal system. But he was from Bundi. He was the second son of the Maharao, the ruler of Bundi state. Well, he was the second son of the Maharao of Bundi state at the time of this event. But as soon as this event was over, he was the Maharaja of Kota state, because Kota was divided in half because of this man's bravery and because of his devotion to the emperor and because he had been the man who had speared Khan Jahan Lodi. The emperor, Shah Jahan, he was able to do this because Bundi had come under his control. He sliced the state of Bundi in half. He gave half of it, kept half of it with Bundi. The other half of it he gave to Madho Singh to rule independently. He thereby created two states ruled by cousins who were in enmity with each other, obviously, because Bundi was half as big, had half the resources that it had. And so they were constantly battling with each other. So Madho Singh has a very important role to play in this because he starts out at Bundi, but he goes to Kota. And I think if we look back at these paintings that are on the walls of the palace at Bundi, I say that there's a Ragamala, there is the Rasmandala, Krishna dancing with the gopis, these very traditional Hindu subjects, which frame on above and below this frieze which shows the palace and shows the hunting scenes and the elephants that's at Bundi, such as we see in the detail of the lower part. And what happens is as follows. These two strains, which are brought together at Bundi, a very traditional strain and a very untraditional strain in the sense that these historical paintings aren't part of the Hindu and the painting tradition in the Bundi area. They split apart, and I think they split apart because the state itself split apart.